An incident that some believe to be the final sign of US dominance in the Middle East interrupted the news in March 2023. China, the US's main global opponent, mediated a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, both of whom are key American partners and rivals. A closer examination of the transaction, however, reveals that China played a little role. Rather, the credit given to the Chinese was a gift from Saudi Arabia and Iran, and it resulted from the absence of a coherent and equitable American diplomatic strategy in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia's emphasis on China's participation was a clear signal to the United States, with Riyadh allegedly requesting complete and renewed assurance for security assurances, as well as assistance for a civilian nuclear program. Hello, welcome to the Inventive Insight YouTube channel. Your groundbreaking and impactful initiatives reshaping our world. If this is your first time here and you're passionate about revolutionary stories from around the globe, then you're in the right spot. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give a thumbs up, and drop a comment. Was it a Chinese game? China's engagement in this deal is far more restricted than media coverage suggests. Negotiations between the two parties have been underway for a long time, with regional states assisting. Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi felt that by encouraging negotiations between the two countries, he could create a better balance between Iran and the Arab Gulf states in Iraq and reduce unilateral Iranian influence. Oman, which has a solid track record as a regional mediator, also played an important part in this reconciliation. Furthermore, the reunion did not come as a huge surprise in a region that has been generally tranquil since the pandemic started in 2020. The long-running Gulf crisis between Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt has ended. Furthermore, the USA, Bahrain, and Morocco forged connections with Israel, while Turkey improved strained relations by re-establishing close ties with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Finally, diplomatic breakthroughs have altered regional assessments of Syria and Yemen, two countries where Iran and Saudi Arabia have clashed since the Arab Spring. Syria has been accepted back into the Arab League, and Saudi officials have begun direct discussions with the Houthis, a step that some hope could lead to greater peace. Is it over for the United States? It is no secret that the present president of the United States and the Saudi rulers do not get along. During his campaign, Biden promised to make the kingdom a pariah state, a position he had to abandon when the price of oil reached 120 USP per barrel following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, ties have cooled since Biden's visit to Riyadh in 2022, owing in part to the U.S. paternalistic approach, which holds that regional states should follow the desired American route, even if it contradicts their national interests. It is also vital to note that the United States has never been regarded as a kind and impartial mediator in Middle Eastern disputes, owing to its close ties with Israel and hostility toward Iran. Furthermore, the United States' abandonment of the JCPOA, as well as its failed withdrawal from Afghanistan, have led to the labeling of U.S. actions as flip-flop diplomacy due to their reactive and self-interested nature, as well as a lack of respect for allies. Saying, by incorporating China into their recent agreement, Iran and Saudi Arabia are sending a clear message to the United States that it can be replaced. However, whether or not this is the case remains to be seen. While China's economic footprint in the region has grown, Beijing does not appear willing to become more fully involved in regional competition, at least for the time being. However, given the attention that American media outlets and officials gave to China's role in the agreement, it is almost clear that the U.S. will be forced to reconsider its regional connections and assess why a partner would turn to China in the first place. The challenge. The Biden administration has been attempting to re-engage China diplomatically, with no response from Beijing thus far. Any wide re-engagement must include re-engagement in the Middle East and North Africa. Both sides have a large list of mutual interests in the Middle East, where their interests vary. It is primarily due to mistrust of the other side's long-term strategy and global ambitions. How can Washington and Beijing build on their regional common interest while addressing long-term concerns, decreasing some of them, and accommodating robust competition, if not outright antagonistic attitudes in other areas? The commons, keeping energy and trade moving freely through important waterways in the region, like the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, fighting terrorism and armed extremist groups before they become a threat, stopping the spread of weapons of mass destruction, especially nuclear weapons, and ending civil wars and calming them down so that terrorists don't have as much uncontrolled space to work with. Longer term, the area is a key actor in both the successful global energy transition and the reinforcement of global climate action. Interestingly, many Chinese interests overlap with those of the United States, maintaining the free flow of energy and trade, which China benefits greatly. Combating terrorism and Islamic extremist groups, which China identifies as a national security threat in its westernmost province. And combating the spread of weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons, China was a key signatory to the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPA. While the United States is concerned about being drawn into another war, China is concerned that any interstate regional battle will drive up energy prices and disrupt energy and trade networks. China, like the United States, is interested in a steady energy transition and a successful global climate change endeavor in the long run. The differences, of course, the United States and China have competing interests or principles. China represents an authoritarian and command type of governance, whereas the United States represents and sometimes promotes democracy and human rights. However, neither side's actual foreign policy has been based on these elements. China does not impose its governance model on the region, though some of its surveillance technologies allow it to do so. And American interests have dictated partnerships with multiple authoritarian and repressive governments, as well as continued support for Israel, despite the latter's colonization of occupied Palestinian territory and other violations of international law. China and the United States have been on opposing sides of the Syrian conflict and have taken divergent approaches to Iraq. Despite their common interests in the present, the United States and China are at odds in the future. They're shadowboxing based on their assumptions about each other's long-term goals. While the United States currently holds a dominant strategic position in the MENA region, it is concerned that Chinese commercial ports, industrial parks, and other forms of economic engagement may provide dual-use opportunities and political leverage that could accumulate over time to challenge America's strategic dominance. And it is also concerned that China's modest arms sales to the region may grow to threaten proportions over time. President Xi Jinping has crisscrossed the region, challenging America's erstwhile unipolar position. And Chinese strategists are clear that their economic projects and companies should serve as an enabler for China's overseas hard power projection over time, if and when that might be required. It is no secret in China that the United States military presence in the Middle East supports the free movement of Chinese energy supplies and exports out of and into the region. And China has made no significant attempts to disrupt America's current strategic burden sharing in the region. However, there are voices in Beijing warning that if China and the United States are doomed to battle in the future decades, China cannot leave the waterways on which it relies for oil supplies and trade in the hands of a possibly hostile U.S. military. Today, both countries risk drifting into exaggeratedly hostile relation that not only overlook and fail to build on their shared interest, but also become part of a self-fulfilling prophecy that confirms negative biases and increases large-scale risk in the Middle East and globally. Principles of the United States, what would a more cautious and deliberate Middle East policy toward China look like? National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan outlined 5 principles for overall US policy in the Middle East in a recent address to the Washington Institute for Near East Policy: partnerships, deterrence, diplomacy, and de-escalation, integration, and values. In 3 of these 5 principles, the US and China have room to engage: de-escalation and diplomacy. The Biden administration has been serious about leading with diplomacy, both worldwide and in the Middle East region, and it has tried, with limited success, to re-engage China diplomatically in recent weeks. There are also calls in Beijing for a return of diplomacy to diffuse the heightened tensions. It is obvious that the United States and China should also lead with diplomacy in attempting to manage their common and competing interests in the MENA area in order to strengthen the former and reduce the possibility of confrontation over the latter. There is plenty that the United States and China might work on in terms of de-escalation. China has been successful in de-escalating the Saudi-Iranian dispute, while the United States has been successful in brokering agreements between Israel and Arab states. China can also be helpful in finding both political solutions and reconstruction plans for conflict toward nations such as Yemen, Sudan, Libya, and eventually Syria. Integration Sullivan underlined the need for regional integration in advancing regional peace and prosperity. China is already playing a big role in boosting regional integration. Integration will necessitate the development of regional commercial, transportation, and energy networks, as well as connectivity. The goal for both sides is to encourage investment in integration, while simultaneously heightening strategic concerns and tensions over these investments. Partnerships. Even in terms of the first principle of partnership, Sullivan cited the Odawu Initiative, which brings together India and the United States, as well as Israel and the United Arab Emirates, to address regional challenges in water, energy, transportation, space, health, and food security. Although it is difficult to conceive in today's tense political climate in both Washington and Beijing, there are several issues in the region where the US and China may benefit from cooperation. The difficulty is that the Biden administration has been attempting to re-engage China diplomatically, with no response from Beijing thus far. Any wide re-engagement must include re-engagement in the Middle East and North Africa. Both sides have a large list of mutual interests in the Middle East, where their interests vary. It is primarily due to mistrust of the other side's long-term strategy and global ambitions. How can Washington and Beijing build on their regional common interests while addressing long-term concerns, decreasing some of them, and accommodating robust competition, if not outright antagonistic attitudes in other areas?